Hi, and welcome to the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, speaker, and general explorer when it comes to customer and employee experience. I'm really interested in figuring out what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees. So with that in mind, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, authors and academics to uncover some clues about what it takes to build such an organization. Now, some of you may know the podcast as the Rare Business Podcast, but I decided to rename and rebrand the podcast recently. This is for a number of reasons. First one was to mirror the title of my book Punk CX, which was published in June 2019. 2, because I'm a fan of punk music. And 3, it's just more fun, right? If this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then hello and welcome. Please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsko.com, as I've now completed over 300 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then welcome back and thank you. So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have Chip Bell. And for anybody who's been involved in the customer service, customer experience space, Chip is a bit of a legend. He says he's a rumor in his own lunchtime, but I think he's way, way more than that. He's a multi-time author, big consultant and an advisor to many big brands. He's written 24 books, ladies and gentlemen. But before we get into all of that, Chip, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks, Adrian. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Perfect. So Chip, so for people that haven't heard of you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do?
Sure, I'd be delighted to. I am a customer loyalty consultant, keynote speaker, and author. Those are the three buckets I spend time in. And my particular interest, I've been in this business I've had my own company 40 years, so I'm still trying to figure it out. But the whole focus is around creating experiences that build long-term customer loyalty. Mm-hmm. My particular area of interest is what I call value unique service. Right. We can get into more details rather than value added. It's basically when we focus on ingenuity and creating innovative experiences, ones that kind of create a story people are eager to share.
Right. Okay. That's perfect. So actually, before we get into, because the reason why we got together on this kind of podcast is you've written a new book, which we'll talk about in a minute. But as I said before, you let me know that I find out rather that this is your 24th book, and bit of kind of
That's
trivia.
More than I've read. That's more books than I have read, Adrian. I'll be honest with you.
Well, I'll tell you what, it's getting pretty close to the number of books I've read as well, I think. I mean, I've got lots of books, but the number of books I've read cover to cover is kind of probably quite short. But actually, your first book was published in 1979, which is amazing, and it was kind of published with the late Ron Zemke, who wrote the classic Service America in 1985. But then the thing that you can share with me, which is a little bit of kind of I guess service pop trivia, is that you and Ron pioneered the concept now known as customer journey mapping. And you wrote about it in the mid 80s, and at the time it was called Cycle of Service. So there you go. Right. That's super cool.
Yes.
You're a pioneer and a trendsetter as well, Chip.
Well, I don't know about that, but it was an outgrowth of work with a major telephone company called GTE at the time.
Right.
And we were trying to help leaders try to see the world of the customer experience through the customer's eyes. And so this became a way to sort of map, to create a diagram that was reflected, not what the company did, but what the customer experienced. Right. And then we spent a great deal of time validating it with the customer, because we can guess what customers go through, but we know too much. We make too many assumptions. So you got to get the customer's validation. And that means get them involved and go, no, it doesn't happen actually, it's like that. And you skipped that one, and we don't know anything about that one.
Sure.
And so we called them mapping the moments of truth. Mm-hmm. Each time when the customer had an opportunity to form a thumbs up or a thumbs down, and sort of mapping what that looked like, which gave a lot of senior leaders that we worked with an eye-opening experience, because they'd never really seen it moment to moment to moment to moment through the customer's eyes.
Sure.
So, any rate, that was, we wrote about it, and so then it's over time it morphed into being called customer journey mapping. But yeah,
You know
it's a
what's
lot of
kind of
fun.
you know what's fascinating. It's brilliant as well. And you know what's fascinating to me is that was, you know, you talked about that in, you know, in the mid '80s, wrote about it and sort of
Yes,
using it in the mid '80s. So that's like shockingly 35 years ago.
it's amazing, isn't it? Yeah.
And it's amazing. And now that, you know, even when you talk about the concept of customer journey mapping, to some people still find it quite a revelatory thing. And you're like, really? Where have you been for the
Really?
last kind of like few decades?
Exactly. Exactly.
But
So,
before we get into, you know, that's like not wanting to kind of like get stuck down that rabbit hole. Let's talk about the kind of the new book that you've just come out with. It's called Inside Your Customer's Imagination: 5 Secrets to Creating Breakthrough Products, Services, and Solutions. So tell me about it. I mean, why another book? I mean, I always find sometimes writing a book is a bit of a masochistic sort of process. I mean, I'm pleased about kind of when it kind of comes out, but the actual process is sometimes kind of difficult. But
it can
you've written
be,
you've
yeah.
written kind of 24 of them, so you must enjoy it.
I do. I love it. Absolutely. I love it. And I'm not a formulaic writer. I don't have a pattern, or I don't write from an outline. It just kind of shows up, and I take dictation, and grateful I get to be the typist, so to speak, and
Right.
amazed at what shows up on the screen, not feeling any sense of identity. Like, where'd that come from?
Yeah.
So it's a magical process for me. And I have learned some ways to make it go faster, more productive, more efficient. But nevertheless, the project, it is a lot of fun. The editing, you know, Ernest Hemingway always said, write drunk, edit sober. So the editing, he probably never said that, but it sounds like Ernest Hemingway anyway.
Yeah.
But that part, with that, the writing part, the creative part is the part is the joyful part. The editing part, for thank goodness I have a team of people who can help me do some of that, because I wouldn't recognize a dangling participle if I saw one.
Hmm.
But we got editors that do all of that, and that's the harder, more messy part of trying to make it sound organized. But at any rate, this particular book, I felt like was an opportunity to take the field in a further direction, in terms of how we treat, how do we include, how do we involve, how do we franchise customers in a way that results in innovation, their innovation, our innovation, and builds advocacy, which is that's one of the drums we all beat. Is
Sure.
we don't want to retain customers, we want them to be raving fans. And so it was that opportunity to try to take it to a new place.
Okay. I mean, that's great. I mean, I think you and I are sort of like, you know, so I think singing from the same kind of like hymn sheet, or banging the same drum.
You bet.
But what I wanted to do was to maybe give people a flavor of the book. I wanted just to kind of explore a few areas
Sure.
or kind of themes and things. And the first thing I wanted to start with was like, you talk about this idea of the difference between participation and partnership, because a lot of people have talked about getting their customers involved with things, asking your customers for their opinions, co-creation, and all that type of stuff. But you've kind of made this distinction between participation and partnership. I wonder if you can explain that to me, because I thought that was quite important.
Adrian, when you were a little boy and I was a little boy and our mamas made a cake, I bet you got to lick the beaters.
Yeah.
But you probably didn't get to make the cake.
No.
And so, metaphorically, we oftentimes get customers to lick the beaters and let us know what they think, so to speak. This book is more about letting them help us make the cake.
Right.
I'll give you a couple examples of each. Starbucks has a lot of innovations that were the result of customer input. For example, Splash Sticks came from the customers. Cake Pops came from the customer. Wi-Fi in all the stores came from the customer. Didn't come from corporate. It came as a result of a program they had where they got customers involved in how do we redesign our stores, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's an example of customer participation. And I think it's great because, you know, people care when they share, and when you get them involved that way,
Yeah.
Helping you make choices, make decisions, give you feedback, offer you suggestions. They feel a sense of their skin in the game.
Yeah.
Compare and contrast that with eBay. eBay, when they first came out, this is back when apps were just beginning, and they wanted an eBay app, an auction
Hmm.
app. And so Meg Whitman, who was at that time CEO of eBay, said, well, we could turn it over to a design team, or we can get the customer to help us do it and bring customers in and let them sit at the table with us and let us, what about this, and help us solve that. And they actually got them physically involved in all the design steps of creating an app. That it was a huge success,
Right.
even down to pricing the app or what it should cost, or et cetera. So it's getting customers to put their fingerprints on what you're doing rather than just their suggestions.
Right.
So it's a deeper level of involvement,
Okay. I mean, I think that it was important to kind of like, I think to point out that sort of distinction, because I think there's a lot of companies that sort of explore the participation bit. Like,
Sure.
how do you ask for feedback? How do you get people involved? How do you kind of help them provide suggestions? And that's kind of fine.
Yeah.
But they're actually just highlighting this. Actually, there are companies that are very successful that go out there and actually build these bigger, and well, not bigger, so more deeper relationships with the customers and get them more closely involved.
Yep, absolutely. Even Egg McMuffin came from a customer.
Right.
I
There you
mean,
go.
the actual creation of it's a great story. For McDonald's, we are consumers. Their franchises are their customers.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a franchise, Herb Peterson on the West Coast, who said, I want to invent a new breakfast sandwich. And he actually got a blacksmith to create a circle device where it would cook the egg in a perfect circle that would fit on a muffin.
Mm-hmm.
And he took as a franchisee, he took the idea to Ray Kroc. Ray Kroc loved it, thought it was fantastic. And so now it was the first opportunity for a fast food restaurant to offer breakfast
Right.
in the fast food chain business. Well, it's a $5 billion business, just breakfast for McDonald's.
Yeah.
But here's an example where a customer actually invented something in that sense, and took it to them and they implemented it. So
yeah, no, absolutely. It's
Yep.
great. Hopefully the franchisee kind of got some share of the $5 billion.
Oh, you would hope. I doubt that.
Yeah, no, I doubt it too, but you never know.
His son would call him a madman in the kitchen. He was just a scientist. He was
Yeah.
just passionate. So
But-
anyway, it's a great story about him.
No, absolutely. So the book is, as you said before, is built on these 5 secrets. I mean, can you tell us kind of like, give us an overview of kind of what they are and why you think they're important?
I'll tell you where they came from.
Okay.
So since the book's about innovation inside your customer's imagination, how do you go inside the customer's imagination, build the kind of relationship where they're willing to share with you their crazy off-the-wall ideas? And how do you work with them in a partnership to mine those crazy ideas and turn them into a solution or a product or whatever?
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, okay, if we're going to talk about an innovative relationship, let me start with an innovative company. So I looked at a lot of companies we all would recognize as highly innovative.
Mm-hmm.
Google, Pixar, we can all name them. It's not,
Sure.
they're not hard to identify. And you should go inside their cultures and say, okay, what are the features that you find constant and consistent among these organizations?
Yeah.
And what you find is, and here are your 5 secrets, they are intensely curious.
Yes.
They take curiosity to another level. They're very grounded, focused on what they're trying to achieve, and stay very focused on a particular mission. They don't get distracted. They don't go down rabbit holes. They stay very focused. Third, they're very focused on risk taking that will result in learning.
Right.
You can remember Thomas Edison, I didn't make a mistake. I just found 150 ways the incandescent light wouldn't work.
Sure.
So it's the attitude of discovery, but it's basically risk taking. And we can talk about that one. They create an environment that's very trusting. That's the 4th secret. So people are willing to tell the truth. They're willing to be open. They're willing to be honest. They're willing to be vulnerable. That's a trustful environment. And finally, they're very passionate about what they do.
Yeah.
So the 5 building blocks, 5 breakthrough, 5 secrets are curiosity, grounding, discovery, trust, and passion.
Perfect.
And I said, okay, what do these look like if you applied them to a relationship?
mhm.
In this case, a customer relationship. Obviously, they're the building blocks of any partnership.
Absolutely. And no, so I think they're really kind of interesting, kind of like lenses to think about it, and it sort of just breaks it all down,
Yes.
and you know what I noticed about the book is like it's completely laced through with all sorts of different stories, and
Right.
one of the stories in the book is all about curiosity, because you highlight curiosity as this big secret to many firms' success.
Yes.
And so I would like you to tell me a couple of stories that are in the book about that,
Oh, absolutely.
particularly the one about, or there's two rather, particularly about Stu Leonard's farm fresh food store, and
Sure.
also the bank in Nicaragua, and how they've
Okay.
used curiosity to help drive their own success and better outcomes. Because I think those two stories are great.
Okay, great. What Stu Leonard is a famous dairy store in the States.
Mm-hmm.
His distinction is the fact that has the highest, his store. It's a family owned business, been going back since the grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
And it had the highest retail sales per square foot of any grocery store in the world. They're in the Guinness Book of World Records.
Right.
They have been consistently on the best companies to work for in America in Fortune magazine.
Mm-hmm.
So they're a unique company.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that Stu has started years ago is that every week he'd do a focus group with his customers, and they would say, what do you like? What do you don't like? And then as soon as it would be over with, they'd go to work implementing it.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever they heard that customer say, and try it, test it, and pilot it. Another thing they would do is, we all know about suggestion boxes, but he gets hundreds of suggestions every week.
Mm-hmm.
And why would he get 100 suggestions every week? Because what he does is he takes those suggestions out every day, and he makes copies of them, distributes them around the store, and he posts them and tells the customer, here's what you asked for, here's what you suggested, and here's what we're doing about it, or here's what we're working on. And so the customer realized, hey, that my input matters, because they're actually trying stuff that people like me or mine. It provides that feedback. The research shows 95% of companies get feedback from customers, but only 5% will let the customer know what they did with it.
Sure. And wasn't there a particular thing that he did about because they introduced fresh fish into the store, but then there was one suggestion that kind of completely had a transformative effect on their sales.
Exactly. It doubled their fish. Customer says, why do you package the fish? Why don't you have them fresh? And the conventional wisdom at that time in the industry was, well, if you put in fresh fish, it'll cannibalize the packaged fish, but it didn't. They doubled their fish sales.
Yeah.
And because of that, and that's the kind of stuff of trusting the customer. Why don't you let us pick out our own strawberries right from the farm, instead of having them already prepackaged, and their sales and strawberries went up like triple, and people.
Sure.
So yeah, it's that kind. And many people have been around for a while, saw the Tom Peters In Search of Excellence movie about him.
Yeah.
And he's of course referenced in Tom Peters' work, but nevertheless, it's still there. I stay in contact with Megan Bell, who's head of their public relationship, no relation to mine, but who's in charge of their PR. I stay in touch with Stu Jr., who's basically the CEO of the store, and Tom.
Mm-hmm.
And so it continues. That legacy that was written about in Search of Excellence, Passion for Excellence, is still alive and well in all of their stores. And I've been in a number of their stores. They're still doing unique and creative. Let's try this.
Perfect.
The thing is, they're willing to pilot it. They won't say, well, two customers said we need this, let's go implement it. They'll go, well, that's a great idea. Why don't we try it? Let's pilot it and see how it works. So they're all about testing ideas and trying new stuff. The Nicaragua story, the bank in Nicaragua came from a customer. What had happened was when we started working with this bank in Nicaragua, they were using the Net Promoter Score.
Right.
And that's all great. I'm not here to bash Net Promoter, but we said, well, Net Promoter is great, but what it tells you is, it tells you intention. It reports intention.
Yeah.
Would you recommend to a family member or a friend?
Hmm.
So what if you ask the customer, have you recommended to a family member or friend? I mean, they were all excited about their real high Net Promoter Score and how many promoters they had that said they would recommend. But then they were shocked when they asked, have you actually recommended?
Sure.
And they got a real low, much lower score. I mean, it was a difference, but 30 to 40% difference between Net Promoter and actually recommendation. So they go, it's not about intent, it's about behavior and about
Sure.
actually people recommending us. So they said, let's get customers involved, let's get frontline people involved. And one of the takeaways they learned by getting those folks involved and saying, how can we change this? What can we make it different? Is one of the tellers said, if we had business cards that we could give to the customer, it would make that whole process of recommending it easier. It's easy for somebody to say, well, I like my teller, and I really would recommend you go to this particular bank, as opposed to saying, well, hey, wait a minute, I got an extra business card here. And we tested it, and we found dramatically increased the likelihood of that customer who received a card. They would actually come into the branch and say, a friend of mine gave me this business card, and they'd actually go to the particular teller
Yeah.
uh, who gave them the card and stand in their line because my friend said you were great. So it changed the whole behavior, and the root of it was all about participation, all about the partnership with the frontline employees. So again, it's came by saying we need to better understand our customers. Let me demonstrate curiosity and learn as much as we can. I have one of the concepts in the book, Adrian, is called "Be the Customer," and
Yeah.
probably most of us have small kids play little league baseball or whatever, and you taught that kid when they're at bat, be the ball, be the ball, and
Hmm.
it was all cue to get that child to focus on the bat when it came from the pitcher.
Hmm.
Well, if you be the customer, it's like, what can I do to mesh myself so I can almost be the customer? I can stand in their shoes. I can feel the world like they feel it. We started with cycles of service or customer journey map. And it's that kind of, how do I get in their mind and think like they do? And while I'm inside there with them, maybe they can dream with me a little bit and say, what is not something. Let me give you an example of what I mean by dreaming. We were working with a major pizza company, delivery pizza company.
Right.
You'd know the name.
Yeah.
And we asked them, let's dream a little bit in this focus group. We did a bunch of focus group. And we were thinking it's all going to be about price, product, or process. That's what we were
Hmm.
going to hear about. But when we got to the dreamer questions, they'd say, well, what about the box? We say, what? The pizza box. What do I get the pizza box and I throw it away. Why don't you do something with the pizza box? We go, wait a minute. What are you talking about? Well, you could put a puzzle on the inside. You could put, a mask. You could have all kinds of fun things for kids to do with it. So you could turn the inside of that lid into a toy. And sure enough, several years later, I'm working with a large paper manufacturing company that made pizza boxes for this company. And
Right.
sure enough, what they've done is created a puzzle or any number of things on the inside of that lid. And they had their folks put a sheet of plastic over the pizza so it didn't soil the top of the lid, inside of the lid.
Sure.
Became a toy.
I
Well,
think they could have. I mean, that's almost an idea that was borrowed from cereal boxes.
yes, it was exactly. But it's getting the customer. It's being so into the customer, so a dreamer with the customer that you dream with them and take them inside their imagination and go,
Hmm.
hey, have y'all ever thought about doing it like this? Or have you? It's that kind of. And so curiosity it's a special kind of curiosity. It's not just I'm interested. It's I'm willing to go there and join with you, and let's see what we can explore together. So it's a treasure hunting curiosity.
Yeah. No, no, I get that. I mean, I think it's that is one of the kind of the things that I, trying to advocate for as much as possible is like, get out of your own way. It's like, it's not
Yeah.
about your job and the tools that you have.
Right. Right.
It's because it's about the problem that the customer has, or the kind of their perspective, and how
Yes.
you can, if the closer you can get to that, the better place you will be, the better placed you will be to figure out how best to deploy or employ the tools and the methods you've got in order to kind of help solve or address that kind of problem.
Exactly.
And I think this, we don't see enough of it, and people kind of like often turn around to me and say, if I've asked them that question, like, how much time have you spent with the customer? And they're like, oh, well, back-to-back meetings and kind of, oh, I don't have time for that. And I'm like going, so you're telling me that a meeting is more important than spending time with your customers?
Right. Great question.
And you know what I mean? It's a bit like going, you can lay it out and you just go.
It's not complicated.
No,
It's simple, but it's also powerful.
Yeah. Because then they go, no, it's not. That's not what I'm saying. I says, yeah, but that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
And
yeah, exactly. And it's also asking, who knows this customer that I could learn from? You know,
yeah.
I used the example of John Longstreet, who at the time was general manager of a hotel, who would have focus groups every quarter with the taxi drivers who frequented his hotel, because he knew when people left the hotel, they just told the front desk fine when they said, how was your stay? He knows when they get in that taxi, it's going to be a different story.
Yeah.
So he knew those taxi drivers would learn. And so he bought them breakfast every quarter and picked their brain about what they'd hear about the customers' discussion about the hotel they just came from. So
that's cool.
Yeah, it's little stuff like that, you know.
So, I mean, I think that's all kind of great, and I love the idea of kind of getting more involved with your customers and sort of, you know, building that sort of partnership with them. I mean, but then, you know, I remember kind of like, was it Steve Jobs kind of famously kind of like said, people don't know what they want until you show it to them.
Right.
And he was talking about that squarely in terms of innovation and things. How does that sort of idea square with what you're talking about? Or is that?
Well, I think it's a recognition that they don't know and we don't know, but if we can get together, we can discover it.
Right.
And so think about your commitment to a solution. If we don't know how to solve this, they don't know how to solve this, but what if we got together and figured it out?
Right.
Think about their commitment, or if the word got out that says the customers actually came up with a splash stick deal. You know, we all don't like it when we go to we all don't like it when we go by, get a hot coffee and it's got the lid on it, and we're taking it back and we're sloshing it around and it sloshes through that little hole in the lid and it's hot on our. Boy, wouldn't they come up with something like that? And so getting together with customers, they solve it. It's to me, that's the key. We don't customers don't know always what they want, nor do we.
Yes.
To me, this book is about a way, not the only way, but a way to say, how do we partner with the customer in a way together where we begin to focus on solutions, product, services that nobody had ever thought about, nobody had ever considered. You know, I can give you tons of examples, but to me, that's the key is using that relationship, that partnership as a discovery process. And again, the commitment to the customer goes up.
Yeah, and I think I think it's kind of brilliant. Like you kind of say, this is like a way, not the only way.
No.
And I think because the important kind of thing is just to, and what the book does is sort of exposes, you know, with lots of different stories and all these kind of secrets about kind of like the depth of which you can go to and the kind of like, you know, the scope of opportunity.
Right.
But I think the thing I wanted to ask you about that, with all the different examples that you have of businesses and organizations in the book that exemplify the sort of behavior you're talking about, and the thing that struck me was that, or the thing that I wanted to ask you is that, do you think that it's just they do that because it's just part of how they do things, or is it that they've actually learned it over time? You know, that idea to say, I guess my question is like, if we're talking about, you know, the idea of, you know, the curiosity or being kind of more grounded, focused and, you know, intent on learning and discovery and building trust and then having that passion, you know, is that something that we can learn?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. We can learn it. And I think part of it is the paradigm from which we ask and demonstrate that curiosity. That's why I opened the chapter in that section by talking about Carl Rogers and my wonderful opportunity to spend time with this world famous psychotherapist and watched how he thought and how he approached and how he demonstrated curiosity. And it is a different when we tend to do customer research, we sort of know the answer.
Yeah.
And we're looking really for verification of what we sort of already know.
Yes.
And so it limits our capacity to venture into hopes and aspirations, and we kind of stick with needs and expectations.
Right.
And the stuff of innovation is obviously doesn't come necessarily out of needs and expectations. It comes out of hopes and aspirations.
Mhm.
That's why a dreamer question like, what's something no pizza company's ever done that would be kind of cool?
Mhm.
Is a kind of framing the inquiry in a way that takes you out of sort of, I know what you're going to say.
Yes.
And so if we go into it, discovery, like a treasure hunt, that's why I keep using that phrase, treasure hunt, we're all surprised by where we end up.
Yes.
And so to me, that's true curiosity is I'm exploring with you in a realm we none of us know. This is not just an interview, a Q&A interview where I have structured questions. You know, it's a conversation that explores a category that we don't really know where it's going to go. And so
Yeah.
I think
I,
that's learnable.
I think the kind of the I remember reading a story in a book kind of once, and it was about a story about Lego, and I think it was written by, I forget the guy's first name, but I think it's Lindstrom. He wrote a book called Small Data,
Uh-huh.
and it was about the story that I remember was about Lego, and this was around the time before Lego became super successful, kind of again. So when Lego was
Right.
popular when we were kids,
Sure.
and then they had a bit of a dip, and then they came back kind of like with a vengeance, as it were. And I think
Right.
on the path back, as it were, they were doing some kind of research in terms of trying to understand the relationship people have with Lego. And they went to visit a whole bunch of their customers and loyal Lego kind of owners and buyers, and but it did it in their homes.
Right.
And they visited one. There's one story that stood out. It was like, I think it was one. They visited one family, and they were talking to them about Lego, and they were talking about, like Lego was a thing they'd used through the generations, and and be passed kind of down. But then they were having quite an adult conversation about it, and then there was this kind of one young boy that was there. He was this kind of the son of the parents that they were visiting, and one of the folks from Lego asked him, says, so kind of, what's your name, kind of, what do you do, sort of thing. And he was like, he was kind of telling me, she's like, so what's your favorite thing in the world? And the little boy kind of put his fingers up and he went, hold on. And then he kind of like turned around, run away, kind of went to get something, and he came back and he bought these pair of trainers, like a pair of old Adidas sort of thing.
Uh-huh.
And he turned them over, and he said he look at the soles of these Adidas. He said, these prove that I'm the best skateboarder in my neighborhood.
Right.
Because of the wear pattern on the bottom.
Yes. Right.
Of the kind of the thing. One was almost like new because it was consistently on the board, and one was definitely worn down in a particular way, which meant he could do a particular like reverse kickflip, blah blah blah, whatever. And he said that's what kind of like proves that I can do, which is and the thing that it meant in the mind of the Lego kind of like representative was, it's actually the most important thing is not the connection they had with the trainers was about the story it helped him tell.
Exactly.
Right.
That is a great example.
And then that was the thing, is like, it's like the trainers were the trainers, right? They kind of happened. They did their job, but actually kind of the story that they told is the thing that made them memorable.
Right.
Right. And I bet that young man has probably kind of kept those trainers or kept them for a long time because of what they stood for.
Sure.
And from Lego perspective, that's where this massive penny dropped. It's like, we're not in the business of plastic bricks.
No.
We're the business of telling stories.
Right. Right. That's great. And see, that's a great example. And it underscores the power of looking at customer research like an anthropologist.
Yeah.
And looking at habits and time and stories and all of the things that are the mythology of the customer's experience, and saying, okay, what does this mean, and how do we translate it?
Mm.
There's a similar story, and I use it in the book about Harley Davidson, and Harley Davidson was going under quickly,
Hmm.
and Willie G. Davidson, who's grandson of the founder, um, who was in charge of design for the company, decided that he'd just get his motorcycle and his leather jacket and his helmet and go on the road and go in dealerships and listen to Harley owners and Harley dealers tell stories about what Harley meant to them and what the bike meant to them and what they were losing and what it meant to see the big change that at that time AMF, who was a bowling company, obviously they had bought them and were taking the legends out and all of that. And it's much the same way that he came back and started the Harley Owners Group and created a whole new approach to how they design the look, the old chopper look of Harleys, and brought the company back. But it was the orientation of an anthropologist, not just the traditional customer service interviewer.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I mean, it's funny you say anthropology because that's one of the things I've been trying on for size, as it were. People say, "What do you do?" I said, "Well, I do. I best sort of one way you could describe it is like service and experience anthropology.
Yes, exactly.
You know,
Exactly.
it's like I'm here to study and understand,
Right.
and then try and translate, and
Sure.
and then figure out kind of what that kind of tells us,
Yeah,
um,
exactly.
rather than actually kind of coming in and going, I'm going to tell you kind of what to do because I'm going to be more right than kind of you. I'm here to observe and understand,
Right.
and then figure out
Right.
what can be better.
Yeah, because the anthropologist sort of stands in the position of non-judgmental, and I think of Margaret Mead and the writings of Ruth Benedict and
Yeah,
and famous anthropologists, and they truly, while they had their own opinions, when they looked at a culture to try to better understand it, it was a totally non-judgmental acceptance of what they saw, and because they totally accept it, they saw things they otherwise wouldn't see
yeah,
as they kind of got past their own biases and assumptions.
hmm,
And so to me, that's true curiosity, is when I really care about who I'm with and care about our conversation and how I can help it become a deep, meaningful, and most important, insight producing. Not just, it's not about creating understanding, it's about creating those ahas. I
yeah,
never thought about it like that. Those kind of insights, what John Longstreet taught me, and when I worked with him at when he was a hotel GM, is he said, what these taxi drivers told me was not just repeating what they heard. When the customer talked about the fact that there were dust bowls under their bed, what they really worried about were bugs in the room. So
yes,
when they talked about the fact that their towels had a little scorched smell, like they'd been in the dryer too long in housekeeping. What they really were concerned about is a fire, and the hotel started in housekeeping.
yeah.
And so beginning to take it from understanding to insight gives you a path to a solution that reflects the depth of what the customers are really concerned about, their core interest, not just their superficial one.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of incredibly important, particularly right now. What with
Right.
we're in the midst of a global pandemic, and we've seen the massive, massive rise. Well, one a drive to digital, but a massive rise in a sort of highlighting the need for more empathy in
Right.
in in, in our service interactions in particular,
Exactly. Exactly.
and so that level of kind of curiosity and willing to learn and to stay focused on the kind of the outcomes and everything else is, as you say, it will drive to insight, but it will also kind of build empathy along the way,
Right. Right.
as
Right.
as it were. So I think that's it's great. But I mean, good on that sort of on that idea. I mean, you've probably been watching just as much as I have over the last kind of like few months about what's kind of been kind of like changing, particularly when it comes to service and experience. I mean,
Yes.
what
Yes.
stood out for you kind of over the last kind of few months?
I think what stood out to me is the need for inventiveness in how we serve,
Hmm.
Like you said, I think we're at a time where we need empathy, but we also need, I think, and this, you write about this in Punk CX, simplicity,
Yeah.
and authenticity in the way in which the service encounter occurs.
Mm.
We've sort of fallen in love with technology and metrics,
Yeah.
and we've somehow sometimes forgotten that service is emotional.
Hmm.
It's not an analytical, logical, rational experience. It's emotional, and
It's an art. It's not a
it
science.
is an art. It's a performing art.
Yeah.
And so, because it's a performing art, I think um, sometimes we try to drive a nail with a B flat, and there's
Hmm.
nothing wrong with B flats. Mozart used them all the time, but it's not the right tool and like the right paradigm sometimes to really understand. And so I think that's what I'm seeing is, at the end of the day, I give you a good example.
Sure.
I've got a friend of mine who there's a liquor store not far from where I live. I don't go there very often, Adrian. I honestly don't go there
When
very
you
often.
do, you buy in bulk.
That's right. I get a year's supply. But a good friend of mine runs a liquor store, and he's in the middle of the mall, so he has no way to create a drive-in. And
Right.
COVID hit, and so he was worried about a number of people in the store. He was worried about physical contact. Were all the things we worry about in Adrian. So what did he do? He put a sign. He put a card table out front of his store and said, "Don't come in. We're all wearing gloves. We've all got on masks. Just come up. Tell us what you want. We'll go in the store and get it, bring it to you, and you can give us our credit card, and we'll take care of the transaction, and you don't have to come in the store." So it cut out browsing, but people went there because it was safe.
Sure.
And I asked him later on. I've written about him several times because he's a real creative kind of retailer.
Uh-huh.
Turns cigar boxes into suggestion boxes and stuff like that. And he was the guy I wrote about in the book who wanted to start his own brand of his own signature bourbon. And he worked out an arrangement with a Kentucky brewer to create 5 different flavors of bourbon, and with his own label on it that he could sell at the store. And then he asked his customers to come back to the back of the store and taste test and pick out the one they liked. And that's the one he went with, and sold out in 2 days because everybody wanted the one they helped make.
Yeah.
And now he's on his fifth brand because he keeps doing the same process of getting the customer to help him pick it out. But to me, he said, the store, there's another liquor store in town, and their sales dropped, his went up. And he said, I think it's because people come here, they see this homegrown approach to safety, and they go, I feel good about this.
Sure.
And his competitor was still letting them come in the store. And
yeah,
so,
I mean, he's gone that sort of like, I'm going to go my own way, but it builds trust in its own way as well.
yeah, exactly. It's authentic, it's simple, it's real, and it's respectful to the customer. And I think that kind of, simplicity is what we need more of. Maybe it's more old fashioned, but I think it makes people feel like they're part of a village, and they feel a connection with their neighbor when they're being served in that kind of environment.
Excellent. And so, I mean, carrying kind of that sort of idea forward, do you think that's kind of that's going to be one of the key challenges kind of going forward? Is how do we maintain that kind of like human connection when we've got such a massive drive to digital investment in technology, et cetera, and everybody's kind of looking for how do you do things at scale, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, is that going to be the key challenge, like retaining that?
I think it will be. And I think what I would see happening is and I've seen this coming for a long time, I think the demise of the big boxes, the struggle of the big boxes is in part related to the fact that people like the small niche players that can do unique to them. Back to the Punk CX, what made Punk unique was its niche. It's not for everybody.
No, indeed.
And so it knows its market and it knows what its market wants. And I think you're seeing the demise of the big box companies. Partly it's obviously stuff that e-tailing and online and all of that, but But I think it's more than that. I think it's the people who want to feel a sense of neighborhood. So I think we're going to see it's going to be a heyday for small businesses. It's going to be a struggle for the the companies that want to serve off the internet, but serve physically, but do it in a huge scale.
Hmm.
Big giant, big boxes. I think those are going to struggle for a while because of that.
Mm.
So I think we'll see for a time a return to the old fashioned, albeit with technology, obviously, and yeah, but we'll use. I think my hope is we'll use technology in a more humanistic way and less sterile, less.
Yeah.
It won't feel like Space Odyssey 2000. It will feel more helper.
Yeah. No, no, absolutely. I think that is the challenge, is how to get that balance right.
Right.
And because I think that consumer behavior is kind of changing, and I think a lot of people are looking for, whether it's where they work or where they buy stuff from,
Right.
as
Right.
looking for, trying to put their other pound or their dollar sort of in a place that kind of like matters to them.
Right. Exactly.
And that, again, but however, there is that sort of like convenience and price and things it you've got to strike that tricky balance,
Yeah. Yes.
because people have got their own sort of like demands and pressures and constraints and
Sure.
things. But
Absolutely.
but I think that thing around purpose and meaning and connection is going to play a bigger role.
Absolutely. And without getting political, I'm hoping that we in our country, with perhaps a new administration, it won't be so derisive, negative,
Yeah.
dark. Um, it'll be more inclusive, and that orientation will be reflected in how we do business.
Yeah. No, I would let fingers crossed for that.
Yeah.
So, Chip, here's a big question. That kind of like that many people that be listening to this kind of podcast or reading the highlights. They're kind of like, this is a niche podcast, right? People will show up because they want to try and learn
Right.
something
Right.
or find out more about how do they improve their experience, the service they deliver to their customers. But in all of your sort of experience, I mean, it's a big subject, it's a big topic, and a lot of people get lost in this idea of like, where do I start?
Yeah.
So if I was to say to you, best advice, where should people start? First couple of things they should do. What would you say?
I'd start with the front line,
Okay.
because that's where the brilliance lies. That's where the knowledge about the customer begins. And I would start there with learning their world and seeing their world, and empowering them to be true ambassadors to our organization, and a critical pipeline to the leadership of the organization. I look at how I've done a lot of work with Marriott
Hmm.
over the years, all over the world, literally. And one of the things that then it starts at the top, and what Bill Marriott was, and his father as well, was all about, was being out there with the people, learning what matters to them and listening to their stories. Even in his mid 80s, Bill would visit 100 properties a year.
Yeah.
And so, to me, that sort of says, and I've been with him when he's been out in a property, talking to people and listening to what he asks.
Hmm.
And he doesn't treat them like frontline. He
No.
treats them like they're on the board.
Sure.
Style and manner and respect and all of that. You'd think he was talking to a board member,
Hmm.
the way in which he addresses them. And so, to me, that's sort of the prototype of saying the front line is where it starts, stops, and that's where a lot of our best intelligence is. And so, if I were any organization, large or small, that's where I'd spend a lot of my energy, is learning to see the world through their eyes and understanding their perspective, and more importantly, empowering them to be scouts for the
Yeah.
organization.
And I
Uh,
think I think that's kind of fair. I mean, I've kind of like been banging on about a couple of things over the last a few months, and say, because a lot of people can say, oh, we need to kind of like we need to kind of we recognize we need to do that, but they don't have this. They haven't make the changes to make the space. And I've said to people, I said, well, the first thing you need to do is kind of almost is be arbitrarily cancelling at minimum 20% of all the meetings that you're invited to every week on an ongoing basis.
Sure.
Because that's the only way you're going to create the space.
And even even beyond the learning you get is the modeling and example that you set and the signal.
Exactly.
Bill Marriott would say, being there with the people is not to make the people feel better, is to make the leader smarter.
Yeah.
So it's how we get smarter in that way. It's it's the kind of learnings that can only come from a face-to-face being involved conversation. And you don't have, I checked into a Marriott in Biscayne Bay, Florida years ago, and Bill Marriott was working the front desk.
Mm-hmm.
And I recognized him because you see his picture with his daddy and in every property. And I asked the bellman when we got on the elevator, I said, "Isn't that Bill Marriott?" "Yes, sir. He's been here for the last couple of days." Well, he doesn't have to do that very often. And the word gets out, Bill Marriott actually is working the front desk. So think about the power. Herb Kelleher made Southwest Airlines powerful, not just because he's a cool guy, which he was, but because he'd get out on the tarmac at busy times like holidays and help them load bags.
Yep.
On Halloween, he'd hide in the luggage bin up above and scare people when they'd get on, when they opened it up. He'd do crazy wild. Now that's Herb's personality, and every CEO can't have that personality, but he set a tone that they were that this is a company that's all about all about people serving people. And it started at the top, and he was willing to put time out there on the front lines, and that says a great deal. I mean, that's a message that it's not happening on Mahogany Road.
Yeah,
and it's happening on Mahogany Road.
And that doesn't matter if you're in frontline retail, frontline kind of healthcare, frontline kind of a business to business, whether kind of selling machinery or parts or whatever. Kind of like, or you're in a part of a field service engineer kind of crew. It's like it means frontline everywhere.
Yep, absolutely. I had a friend of mine, Chip Chapman, who would, in a major hospital, he was the CEO of the major hospital, but he would work in a frontline role. He would put on their equipment, their uniform, and work in that role one day a month. Every month it'd be a different role.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of like an obvious version of,
undercover boss.
Yeah. Same idea, but the people knew who he was, knew he was working in there. And
it becomes like, it's not unusual then. It's just a case of like, actually, you know what? He's one of us.
Yes. And think about what he learned, and think about the message that sent to those that worked in that organization. So,
and they're how they would feel about telling him stuff that he wouldn't hear from other people.
Yep, absolutely.
I think that's absolutely right. So Chip, thank you for that. I mean,
sure.
One final thing before we go. I just want to ask you a couple of quick word association questions related to the Punk CX, the book that I wrote last year. And just to finish off, and so the first one I want to ask is, what one word do you think would you use to rather describe, but one or two words, let's say, a more punk approach to CX, the customer experience? What would you say?
One word.
Or two.
Relevant.
Perfect. And if I was to then say, okay, what company or brand do you think epitomizes a more punk approach when it comes to service or experience?
Well, from my own experience, I would say Amazon would be a good example.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you. Brilliant. So that's kind of like, that's all I have today. Kind of like Chip, sorry. I think that I just want to say kind of like, one, congratulations on all 24 books.
Thanks.
But more recently on this one, I think there's some great insights in there. I really enjoyed a lot of the stories. I think you're advocating for kind of like just more deeper, kind of broader, more open-minded approach to kind of working with customers, which I think is brilliant. And just want to say thank you for sharing your time.
Oh, my pleasure.
And your expertise with me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Adrian. I've enjoyed every minute of it.
Well, that was cool. I hope you enjoyed it. I did, and I always do actually, because I always learn something new when I speak to some of these amazing kind of people. And it's always something new that I can incorporate into my writing, speaking, workshops, and other sort of advisory work that I do. Now, if you're interested in learning about any of that sort of stuff, then you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinscoe.com. One final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or Spotify or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as they say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do tune in again soon. All the very best. Cheers. Bye.